Shabbat Parak Tet Zayin, Mishnah Aleph. First Mishnah, the 16th chapter of Shabbat. We're going to dedicate the learning of this Mishnah both to my father, Rabbi Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman, but we're also going to dedicate it to the memory of this man. His name is Rabbi Haskell Lindenthal, Rabbi Cheskel ben Rabbi Yossel. And I'll explain to you why I'm dedicating to Rabbi Lindenthal, and please bear with me. Rabbi Lindenthal, when my first shtetl, Steller, that's the word, he lived in the shtetl, was in West Hartford, Connecticut. At that time, at the Agudas Achim, I met every mincha and ma'ariv was Rabbi Lindenthal. Rabbi Lindenthal, he wrote this book called Pages of My Life. And it's an unbelievable read. I don't even know if you can get it anymore. He was a youth in a shtetl. He lived in a shtetl. Rabbi Lindenthal told me he lived in a shtetl called Vizan. He called it Vizan, I think, in Poland. And if you look at it, this shtetl is mamish like, looks beautiful and pastoral. It's in the middle, like a tiny, tiny town. And the northeast side of Poland, right on the border of Lithuania. And Rabbi Lindenthal, like if you read it, it talks about how they lived in this unbelievable poverty. Let's go back when I show you. So and why is this relevant to us? Because when you read Rabbi Lindenthal's book and he describes how one night a fire came and wiped out their entire family. He says this is the picture of his family. That survived because the head of the fire brigade, they didn't have any fire trucks. They had buckets, but he bought a bugle. And when the fire broke out, it destroyed 2/3 of the shtetl. Because everything was made of wood, everything was made of straw. And he writes how the parents wrote to America, because they had relatives in America, and then they were able to rebuild, little by little, the town was rebuilt. He said, but they lost everything in the fire. And it made me realize to what degree fire was just an incredible, incredible danger to society. And so that always made me understand the next Mishnayot that we're about to read. Chazal made a bunch of gzeirot. They said you're not allowed to save all of your stuff on Shabbat. Okay? So we're going to learn about certain things that you are allowed to save in the next few Mishnayot and certain things you're not allowed to save on Shabbat. And the reason is, and we're going to see in the next Mishnah, this is the Gemara in Shabbat, Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Bet. So the Gemara in the next Mishnah is going to talk about how much food you can save on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, 1 second, Michdei, Behetera Katarach, Natzil Tvei. You're allowed to, let's say you have an Ewer in your old, etc., and you're working Beheter, save more. Amar Rava says, Mitoch Adam Bahul Al Mimono, because a person is Bahul, he's panicked about his money, meaning it's a fire, everything's burning down. If you permit him to save more, Ati Lichbuye, he'll put out the fire. It's very interesting that in the times of the Gemara, that you were not allowed to save everything. Nowadays, everything is considered Hatzalah Nefashot. If there's a fire, you call the fire department, they put out the fire right away. And there's a logic to that. But there seems to be that in the times of the Gemara, they weren't so worried about that. Get your stuff out, get what you're allowed to get out, and then just get out. And the idea of just putting out any fire is something that you don't see in the halachic literature, at least the ancient halachic literature. Says the Mishnah, Kol kitvei hakodesh matzilin otan mipnei adleika. If there's a fire, you're allowed to save kol kitvei hakodesh, all Hebrew writings. Especially at their times, they didn't have books like we have. It was a valuable thing, kitvei hakodesh. The Bartenura says, what do they have? Neviim uktuvim. Even you have neviim uktuvim, you're allowed matzilin otan mechatzer shenafla bo adleika. You're allowed to save them from the courtyard where there is a fire. Chatzer acheret shebaoto mavoi, to another chatzer in the same mavoi. We'll see what this is in a second. Af al pi shelo irvu, even though they didn't make an eruv. Okay, and so we're going to see what is this. Let's look now. I found this amazing photo stream on Flickr. Okay, it's from a guy named, I don't know. It's difficult. Mishnah Sinai. I really don't know who this is, but it's actually quite incredible. So what's a mavoi? Let's look. So he made these pictures for Eruvin, and we will come back to these pictures in Eruvin. Okay? I want to see if I can make this a little bit smaller so I can see the picture. Here we go. Okay? This is a chatzer. You can't really see it in this picture. Let's go back and see if I can see it in another picture. Okay? In a chatzer, here, this is a much better picture. This is the way that they organized their living spaces. You had a chatzer, which was a communal area, similar to, I would say, in apartment houses, and each house leading out into the chatzer, and they would have this shared common courtyard. There were a bunch of chatzerot, and each chatzer led to a mavoi. The mavoi was the common, I would say, alleyway. Okay, and you could make an eruv chatzerot, or you could make an eruv mivoot. An eruv chatzerot would allow people to carry in the common courtyard, or you could make an eruv mivoot, and that would allow people to carry from one courtyard to another. Okay, and in order to make an eruv on the mavoi, you'd have to put either a lechi, as we'll see, or a korah across the top of it. It's called a lechi. Okay, this is all relevant to the discussion we're going to have. So the Bartanura says you can take it from this chatzer to the next chatzer, afal pishalo eruvu. Even though you didn't make an eruv for the entire mavoi, you'd say you only made an eruv chatzerot. Nonetheless, if a fire broke out in this chatzer, the whole thing's going down. The whole thing's going to burn. So therefore, you wanted to take your kitvei kodesh, you wanted to save your Sefer Torah or your Navi, and you wanted to put it over here. All right, but you didn't make an eruv. So the Mishnah says you're allowed to matzilin kol kitvei kodesh matzilin b'pnei adleika. You can save them. Ben shekorim behem, or ben she'en korim behem. Even though, whether you read them, whether you're allowed to read them on Shabbat, you're not allowed to read them on Shabbat. We'll explain why you're not allowed to read them on Shabbat. I.e., which ones do we read and which ones don't we? Meaning, let's say we do read it because it's a haftorah, it's this week's Torah reading, or whether you're not allowed to read them. Okay? And even if these kitvei kodesh, even if they're read in any language, to unim gniza, they have to be put in gniza if they're destroyed. If you're not going to use them, you can't just throw them away. Meaning even English translations of halacha, of ktuvim, or in their day, Greek translations, they had to be put in gniza. One second, if I have Navi, let's say I have a book of Chavakuk, why couldn't I read them? Because of bitul beit midrash, people wouldn't come to the beit midrash. Okay, let's see the Bartanura. En korim behem, ktuvim, I have Chavakuk. Av yechidim en korim behem. Even individuals were not allowed to read them. Bitul beit midrash, because of bitul beit midrash. Shayu dorshim la'am b'Shabbat. The rabbi would get up and give his drasha. Umarim lehem ilchot isur v'heter. He would tell them what they could do and what they couldn't do. Throughout the week, they wouldn't come to shir. But on Shabbat, they have to come to shir. The rabbi gives his drasha. V'asru likrot b'ktuvim b'Shabbat. And the Chazal made it asr to read ktuvim b'shat beit midrash during the times of the beit midrash. Why? Mishum demashchei libra. Because it's very enticing books. And people would not come. Imagine if I, as a rabbi, could get up and say, okay, no newspaper. Well, they did say that. No books, no newspapers, no nothing during the rabbi's drasha. Shabbat afternoon, hour before mincha, you can't read. And everybody would come to the shul, to come to shir. They should reinstitute that. Anyway, so therefore, even though you're not allowed to save them, even though you can't read them, even though they're books that you're not allowed to read, because the Rabbanim made gzeira, you're allowed to save them. Matzilin tika sefer, ima sefer. And you could also save the tik, the book, the covering, the pouch, the bag it's in. V'tika tefillin, mina tefillin. You want to save a tefillin also together with its pouch. V'alfa pisheyesh b'tochan ma'ud. Even if there's money in it, we're going to call that's tiltum min atzad. You're derech agav. You're saving the tefillin, which you're allowed to do. Even though there's money in it, you're allowed to save the whole thing. Ulehechan matzilin. And where are we allowed to save it? The mavoy she'eno mefulash. We're going to see these terms in Eruvin. Mavurish, mefulash, ein ono mefulash. There's a machlok about what it means. But the Bartanura here says it means, sheyesh lo shalosh mechitzot, v'lechi echad beruach harvi'it. This is exactly the mavui we described. It has 3 walls in this mavui, and it has this lechi. And the Mishnah's terms in this case, that's called a mavui she'eno mefulash. Mefulash means open. It's not considered totally open. Okay? That's a mavuish, excuse me, she'eno mefulash. 1 second. Zeh mavuish she'eno mefulash. Shalosh mechitzot below lechi, but if there was a shalosh mechitzot without a lechi, zeh mavuish mefulash. That's the mavuish mefulash. So if it, where can I find? I'm sorry. If it would be mefulash, if it didn't have a lechi, eno mefulash means it's not open. It means it has a lechi. So that's what our Mishnah says. To what kind of mavui? Where can you save it? A mavui eno mefulash. If it has a lechi. Ben B'teira says, ah mefulash. Even if this mavui didn't have the lechi, be able to save it. Now we're talking about a mavui that you did not make an eruv. How can I save things from one mavui to another? Remember, this is only a asur d'Rabbanan. You're only allowed to carry from one mavui to another. It's not reshut harabim. It's a mavui. So therefore, the Rabbanan said you can't carry from one mavui to another unless you made an eruv. Unless you have the lechi, or unless you made an eruv. So therefore, the Rabbanan can say, we didn't include in our gzeira if there's a fire. We didn't include certain things in the gzeira. And therefore, they can say that kitvei hakodesh maftzilin, when there's a fire, when there's a deleika, you can save these Kitvei HaKodesh. Again, we'll dedicate this learning to the memory of Rabbi Lindenthal Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He was a great man. He served in that. You can see he went. You can stop now if you want, but it's just a fascinating life. Okay, he learned in Grodno when he was a child. Then he went to Mir. Then he learned in Chevron Yeshiva, where he learned how to be a mocheg. Then after he went to Israel. He joined the Haganah, and he was trained in small arms and hand grenades. And from there, in 1940, he moved to America. Oh, yeah, he's a great man. It was a privilege to know him. We'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, as always, feel free to contact me, arspoter@gmail.com.